I was treating the wounded. In silence, until one of them said, "You saved my brother too." The air, thick with the acrid scent of cordite and damp earth, clung to everything. It was the smell of fear, of exhaustion, of a world unraveling. In the brutal arithmetic of war, lives were reduced to numbers, enemies to faceless adversaries. Yet, beneath the cacophony of artillery and the chilling silence of unspoken dread, a different kind of sound often emerged, the quiet hum of shared humanity. This is not a chronicle of battles won or lost, nor a testament to the strategic brilliance of generals. Instead, this is a journey into the shadowed spaces between the front lines, into the hearts of those caught in the maelstrom of the Second World War. We seek out the whispers of empathy, the unlikely acts of compassion that bloomed in the barren soil of conflict, moments so profound they defy the logic of war. Our story begins not with grand pronouncements, but with the intimate, the personal, the stark reality of individuals forced to confront the unthinkable. It is about the flicker of recognition in the eyes of an enemy, the shared breath of a moment's respite, the unspoken understanding that transcends uniforms and ideologies. The script you are about to experience is born from the echoes of such moments, a tapestry woven from true accounts of unexpected kindness that pierced the darkness. This particular narrative is anchored by an extraordinary encounter, a story that begins with the silent, grueling work of a medic tending to the wounded. Imagine a makeshift aid station, a place where life and death dance an agonizing waltz. The sounds are muted, punctuated by the soft groans of pain, the rustle of bandages, the rhythmic, almost prayerful work of healing. The medic, an individual driven by an innate need to alleviate suffering, operates in a world stripped bare of pretense, where the only currency is survival and the only language is that of care. The problem is stark. How does one reconcile the primal instinct for self-preservation, the ingrained animosity towards the other, with the fundamental human impulse to help, to heal, to connect? This script delves into that very paradox, exploring the profound psychological and ethical landscapes that war forces individuals to navigate. It is about the singular moment when the relentless pressure of conflict is momentarily suspended, not by a ceasefire, but by an act of grace. The unique angle here is not just the occurrence of compassion, but its specific, deeply personal genesis and its reverberating aftermath. It's the unexpected connection forged in a moment of shared vulnerability, a connection that challenges the very foundations of wartime animosity. The journey ahead will lead us through the frozen landscapes of the Eastern Front, the muddy trenches of Western Europe, and the shattered cities of Asia. We will witness the grim realities faced by soldiers, civilians, and those caught in between. But our focus will remain unwavering, on the moments of light that stubbornly refuse to be extinguished. We will encounter individuals who, in the face of overwhelming brutality, chose a different path. They are the unsung heroes, not of battlefield victories, but of the enduring spirit of humanity. The script will unfold through a series of meticulously reconstructed events, drawing from historical records, personal testimonies, and poignant letters. These are not fictionalized tales. They are distilled truths, presented with the evocative power of narrative. We will explore the science behind these acts, the biological and psychological underpinnings of altruism and empathy, even in the most extreme circumstances. But more importantly, we will feel the emotional weight of these encounters, allowing them to resonate within our own hearts. Prepare to be moved, to be challenged, and ultimately, to be inspired by the quiet, persistent power of kindness that survived the greatest conflagration humanity has ever known. This is the story of how, even when the world was at its worst, humanity found a way to be its best. The chill of the pre-dawn air bit deep, a familiar companion to the gnawing emptiness in the stomach. Sergeant Anya Petrova adjusted the worn leather straps of her rifle, her gaze sweeping across the desolate, snow-dusted field that separated her unit from the enemy lines. It had been weeks since they'd seen a proper meal, months since they'd known a moment's true peace. The rhythmic thud of distant artillery was a constant, unsettling heartbeat, a reminder of the ever-present danger. Around her, her comrades huddled in their greatcoats, their faces etched with fatigue and a weariness that went beyond mere physical exhaustion. They were young men, most of them, thrust into a conflict that devoured their youth and tested their very souls. Anya, older by a few years, carried a different burden, the unspoken responsibility for these boys, the desperate hope that she could guide them through this inferno and back to a world that still held the promise of normalcy. The silence between the explosions was often more terrifying than the noise itself, pregnant with anticipation, with the unspoken dread of what might come next. Each rustle of wind through the skeletal trees, each distant crackle of a twig, could be a prelude to chaos. Her own story was a quiet one, a narrative of survival woven into the larger, blood-soaked tapestry of the Eastern Front. She had joined the army not out of any fervent patriotism, but out of a grim necessity. Her village, her family, had been caught in the brutal sweep of the invasion, and survival had meant picking up a rifle. She had learned to shoot, to march, to endure, but the act of taking a life, even in defense, had left an indelible mark on her spirit. She found solace, if it could be called that, in the moments when she could offer a different kind of service. In the rare lulls between engagements, she would often find herself drawn to the wounded regardless of their uniform. It was an instinct, a deeply ingrained impulse to mend what was broken, to soothe what was in pain. This was her secret rebellion against the dehumanizing logic of war, her silent assertion of a shared humanity that the conflict sought to obliterate. She carried a small worn kit with her, a collection of rudimentary bandages, antiseptic, and a pair of tarnished forceps, meager tools against the brutal realities of battlefield injuries, but precious nonetheless. The problem, as she saw it, was not just the enemy across the field, but the creeping despair that threatened to consume them from within, the relentless cycle of violence, the constant loss, the sheer overwhelming scale of the destruction. It all chipped away at the soul. How could one maintain their own humanity when surrounded by such inhumanity? How could one hold on to hope when the future seemed like an endless expanse of mud and blood? It was a question that haunted her waking hours and stalked her dreams. She saw the hardened faces of some of her fellow soldiers, their eyes vacant, their hearts seemingly encased in ice, and she feared that same hardening creeping into her own spirit. She fought against it with every fiber of her being, clinging to the memory of softer things, the scent of her mother's baking, the warmth of a summer rain, the simple joy of a shared smile. These memories were her shields, her anchors in the storm. This particular day, however, was to bring a test unlike any she had yet faced. The air was unnaturally still, the silence stretching taut like a bowstring. A sudden, sharp burst of gunfire shattered the quiet, closer this time, more frantic. Anya's unit was ordered to advance, to secure a ridge that had become a flashpoint. The advance was brutal, a chaotic scramble through frozen brush and over the bodies of fallen comrades. The enemy fought with a desperate ferocity, their cries mingling with the screams of the wounded. Anya found herself separated from her squad, pinned down behind a shattered oak, the roar of battle a deafening wave washing over her. It was in this crucible of chaos, amidst the splintering wood and the whistling bullets, that the unexpected was about to unfold. The stage was set not for a grand victory, but for a quiet, profound moment of human connection, a testament to the enduring resilience of the spirit, even when surrounded by the deepest despair. The story that began to unfold in that moment, in that silent space between the thunder of war, was one that would forever redefine her understanding of courage, compassion, and the unyielding power of empathy. The snow, once pristine, was now a canvas of crimson and gray. The air, heavy with the metallic tang of blood, offered little respite from the biting wind. Sergeant Anya Petrova lay prone, the rough bark of the shattered oak digging into her cheek, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The sounds of battle had receded slightly, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the chilling, intermittent crackle of small arms fire. Her own leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a painful reminder of a ricocheting bullet. She had seen too many fall, too many dreams extinguished in the frozen earth. The instinct for survival, a primal force that had guided her through so much, warred with a profound weariness, a deep-seated desire for the fighting to simply cease. It was in this liminal space, between the instinct to flee and the will to endure, that the extraordinary began to take root. The battlefield, a place designed to foster hatred and inflict suffering, was about to become the unlikely stage for an act of profound, unexpected grace. Her gaze, unfocused and weary, drifted across the churned earth. She saw movement, a figure emerging from the swirling snow, silhouetted against the bleak sky. It was an enemy soldier, his uniform different, his rifle held loosely at his side. He moved with a caution that spoke of his own vulnerability, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape. Anya's hand instinctively tightened on her own weapon, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every fiber of her being screamed danger, betrayal. Years of conditioning, of witnessing the brutal efficiency of their kind, had ingrained a deep-seated mistrust. Yet, as the soldier drew closer, Anya saw something in his posture, in the way he moved, that was not aggression. There was a weariness in his gait, a subtle slump to his shoulders that mirrored her own. He was not advancing with intent to kill. He was moving with a quiet purpose that, for a fleeting moment, seemed almost gentle. He stopped a few yards away. His eyes, pale blue and surprisingly clear, met hers. There was no triumph in his gaze, no animosity. Instead, Anya saw a flicker of something she recognized, a shared exhaustion, a silent acknowledgement of the brutal game they were both forced to play. He was young, she realized, perhaps not much older than some of the boys in her own unit. His face was smudged with dirt and grime, a thin cut bleeding just above his eyebrow. He held something in his hand, not a weapon, but a small, crumpled piece of paper. He looked down at it, then back at Anya, a strange expression crossing his features, a mixture of uncertainty and resolve. Anya remained still, her senses on high alert, but the immediate threat seemed to dissipate, replaced by a growing curiosity, a nascent sense of unease that was not born of fear, but of confusion. This was not the enemy she had been trained to expect, not the faceless monster of propaganda. This was a human being, caught in the same brutal current as herself. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his movements slow and deliberate. He held up the paper, his lips moving, but the wind snatched his words away, rendering them unintelligible. Anya strained to hear, her injured leg forgotten for a moment. He stopped again, a few feet from her position. He carefully unfolded the paper, his gloved fingers fumbling slightly. It was a photograph, creased and faded, but still discernible. He held it out, his gaze fixed on Anya's face. Anya squinted, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The photograph depicted a woman and two children, their faces upturned in bright, innocent smiles, standing in front of a small, idyllic-looking cottage. It was a scene of domestic peace, a stark contrast to the desolation surrounding them. The soldier's expression softened as he looked at the photograph, a hint of longing, of memory, passing across his features. He then looked back at Anya, his pale blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely compelling. He gestured towards the photograph, then towards himself, then pointed a shaky finger in the direction Anya's unit had come from. Anya felt a jolt of comprehension, a sudden, overwhelming understanding of his silent communication. He was showing her his family, his reason for being, his hope for a future beyond this war. And he was asking her, in his own way, to acknowledge that shared humanity, that common thread of love and loss that bound them together, despite the uniforms they wore and the guns they carried. This was the moment, the turning point, where the abstract concept of the enemy dissolved, replaced by the concrete reality of a fellow human being. The soldier, his name Anya would later learn was Klaus, lowered his rifle completely, letting it rest in the snow. He took another step, then knelt carefully beside a fallen comrade, not Anya's, but one of his own. Anya watched, her breath catching in her throat. As Klaus fumbled in his pack, he produced a small, dented tin of rations and a half-empty canteen. He offered the canteen to his fallen comrade, then carefully unwrapped a piece of dried bread, placing it gently beside the man's still hand. It was a gesture of respect, of reverence, for a life extinguished. Anya, observing this quiet ritual, felt a profound shift within her. The ingrained animosity, the ingrained fear, began to erode, replaced by a nascent sense of awe. This enemy soldier, this man who was supposed to be her adversary, was performing an act of profound kindness for one of his own, in the very shadow of her own woundedness. It was a stark, undeniable testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the persistent, stubborn refusal of compassion to be extinguished. Klaus then turned his attention back to Anya. He slowly reached into his own tunic, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Anya tensed, her hand hovering near her sidearm, but she held her breath, watching. He pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. With careful fingers, he opened it and withdrew a few dried berries, their color muted by time and travel. He held them out to Anya, his expression earnest, his pale blue eyes conveying a silent plea for understanding. Anya hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution. These were enemy rations. They could be poisoned. They could be a trap. But then she looked at his face again, at the sincerity in his gaze, at the vulnerability he so openly displayed. She saw not a soldier bent on deception, but a human being offering a gesture of goodwill in the face of overwhelming despair. The risk was immense, the potential consequences dire. But the pull of that shared humanity, that unspoken connection forged in the crucible of shared suffering, was even stronger. Slowly, tentatively, Anya extended her hand. Her fingers, stiff and cold, trembled slightly as they met Klaus's. He placed the dried berries into her palm, his touch surprisingly gentle. A silent pact was formed in that exchange, a moment of shared vulnerability that transcended the brutal realities of war. Anya felt a warmth spread through her, a feeling that had nothing to do with the meager offering in her hand and everything to do with the act itself. It was the warmth of recognition, of being seen not as a soldier, but as a person. Klaus then nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible inclination of his head, a gesture of respect, of farewell. He carefully rose to his feet, retrieved his rifle, and without a backward glance, melted back into the swirling snow, leaving Anya alone with her wounded leg and the unexpected gift of dried berries. The silence that followed was no longer pregnant with dread, but with a profound, disquieting peace. The battlefield, for a brief, extraordinary moment, had been transformed not into a place of conflict, but into a sanctuary of shared humanity. The distant rumble of artillery seemed to fade, replaced by the thrumming in Anya's ears. She looked down at the small, shriveled berries in her palm, their muted color a stark contrast to the vibrant life they represented. They were a tangible symbol of an intangible exchange, a silent testament to a moment when the rigid lines of war had blurred, when the enemy had become simply another human being, bound by the same fears, the same hopes, the same capacity for kindness. The wound in her leg still ached, a sharp, insistent pain, but it was overshadowed by a different sensation, a profound ache in her heart, a resonance that vibrated with the unexpected encounter. Klaus's face, his pale blue eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and an almost desperate sincerity, was seared into her memory. His simple act of sharing, his willingness to offer sustenance to a perceived enemy, had cracked the hardened shell that war had been building around her spirit. She remembered the photograph he had shown her, the smiling faces of his family. It was a window into his world, a world that existed beyond the battlefield, a world of love and connection that he was fighting to protect, just as she was. In that moment, the abstract concept of the enemy dissolved completely. Klaus was not a faceless cog in a war machine. He was a son, perhaps a brother, a man with a family who loved him and waited for him. This realization was both liberating and deeply unsettling. It challenged everything she had been taught, everything she had come to believe about the nature of this conflict. The war was not a simple dichotomy of good versus evil, but a complex, tragic web of human lives, each with their own stories, their own motivations, their own capacity for both cruelty and compassion. As she carefully bandaged her own wound, her movements slow and deliberate, Anya reflected on the broader implications of Klaus's gesture. It was an act of altruism, a behavior that seemed to defy the evolutionary pressures of warfare. The scientific explanations for such behavior, she knew, often pointed to kin selection or reciprocal altruism, helping those who are likely to help you in return, or those who share your genes. But Klaus's act seemed to transcend these pragmatic explanations. It was a demonstration of empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, even when that other was an adversary. It was a testament to the inherent human capacity for connection, a capacity that, even in the most brutal of circumstances, could find a way to surface. This wasn't just about survival. It was about preserving a core aspect of humanity, about refusing to let the darkness completely extinguish the light. The weight of the berries in her hand felt significant, far heavier than their small size suggested. They were more than just sustenance. They were a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the midst of utter devastation, acts of kindness could still occur. They were a whisper of a different possibility, a future where such gestures were not exceptions, but the norm. Anya carefully placed the berries into her own ration pouch, a secret treasure, a tangible reminder of Klaus and his quiet act of defiance against the dehumanizing forces of war. The encounter had not changed the immediate reality of her situation. The war still raged, the dangers remained, but it had irrevocably altered her perspective. She carried the memory of Klaus's eyes, the feel of his gentle touch, the silent understanding that had passed between them. It was a seed of hope planted in the barren soil of conflict, a seed that, she knew, would continue to grow, shaping her actions, her thoughts, and her enduring belief in the resilience of the human spirit. The battle for the ridge was a brutal, drawn-out affair, a symphony of destruction that tested the limits of human endurance. Anya and her unit fought with a grim determination, the memory of Klaus's unexpected kindness, a quiet ember within her. It didn't diminish the urgency of their mission, nor did it erase the very real danger they faced, but it offered a counterpoint to the relentless violence. In the midst of the chaos, when the air was thick with the screams of the wounded and the stench of death, Anya found herself looking for moments of shared humanity, not just in her own actions, but in the actions of others. She saw her fellow soldiers, exhausted and bloodied, sharing their meager rations, offering words of comfort to those who had lost comrades. These were not grand gestures, but small, vital acts of solidarity that held the unit together, preventing the darkness from completely consuming them. Later, as the fighting finally subsided and a fragile, uneasy quiet settled over the battlefield, Anya found herself tending to the wounded. The makeshift aid station was a scene of controlled chaos, a testament to the desperate efforts to save lives. Amidst the groans and the hushed urgency of the medical personnel, a young German soldier was brought in, his leg shattered by shrapnel. He was barely more than a boy, his face pale and contorted with pain, his eyes wide with fear. As Anya began to clean and bandage his wound, her movements practiced and steady, the boy flinched, his eyes darting around as if expecting a blow. He was clearly terrified, his ingrained fear of the enemy overriding any immediate relief. Anya worked with a quiet efficiency, her touch gentle, her expression calm. She didn't speak, allowing her actions to convey her intent. As she applied the final bandage, the boy's eyes met hers. There was a flicker of surprise, then something else, a dawning recognition, a softening of the fear. He mumbled something in German, his voice hoarse and weak. Anya couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was not a threat, not a curse, but something akin to gratitude, perhaps even disbelief. She offered him a small, weary smile, a silent acknowledgement of his pain and his vulnerability. He held her gaze for a long moment, and in that exchange, Anya felt a profound sense of connection, a silent understanding that transcended language and nationality. He was not just an enemy soldier, he was a suffering human being, and she had offered him aid. This was the echo of Klaus's gesture, amplified in the shared vulnerability of the wounded. The aftermath of the battle was a period of somber reflection. The cost of victory, as always, was steep. Anya found herself writing a letter to her family, a rare indulgence in the midst of war. She spoke of the harsh realities, the constant danger, but she also spoke of something else, something that had begun to take root within her. She wrote of the small acts of kindness she had witnessed, of the moments when humanity had refused to be silenced. She described, without naming names, an encounter with an enemy soldier, a gesture of shared sustenance, an act that had challenged her perceptions and reaffirmed her belief in the enduring power of compassion. She didn't know if her letter would ever reach its destination, if her words would find their way back to the world she had left behind. But the act of writing itself was a form of catharsis, a way of processing the events and solidifying the lessons she had learned. The war continued, relentless and unforgiving. There were more battles, more losses, more moments of profound despair. But Anya carried the memory of Klaus, and the subsequent encounters like a hidden strength. She continued to offer aid whenever she could, her actions driven not by a sense of duty, but by a deep-seated conviction. She understood now that compassion was not a weakness but a form of resistance. It was a way of holding on to one's own humanity in the face of overwhelming inhumanity. It was a quiet rebellion against the forces that sought to divide and destroy. The dried berries, long since consumed, had nourished her not just physically, but spiritually. They were a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a flicker of light could persist, a testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit. Years later, long after the guns had fallen silent and the world began the arduous process of rebuilding, Anya would often find herself reflecting on those moments. The war had left its indelible scars, both visible and invisible, but it had also gifted her with a profound understanding of human nature, its capacity for both immense cruelty and boundless compassion. She had learned that courage was not just about facing the enemy with a rifle, but about extending a hand of kindness when every instinct screamed for self-preservation. She had learned that forgiveness, though difficult, was essential for healing, not just for the individual, but for the collective soul of humanity. The memory of Klaus, the young German soldier, remained vivid. She often wondered what had become of him, if he had found his way back to his family, if he remembered their brief, silent encounter on that frozen battlefield. She understood now that such acts, though rare and often hidden, were the true echoes of humanity, resonating long after the sounds of war had faded. They were the seeds of reconciliation, the quiet whispers that suggested a possibility of a shared future. These moments did not end wars, she knew. They could not erase the suffering or undo the damage, but they survived them. They proved that the human spirit, even when battered and bruised, possessed an extraordinary capacity for empathy and connection. This understanding became her guiding principle, her quiet legacy. She dedicated her life in small ways to fostering that same spirit of compassion, to reminding those she encountered that even in the darkest of trenches, someone had shared their light, and that light, however small, held the power to illuminate the path forward. The war was over, but its echoes lingered, woven into the fabric of the world. Anya Petrova, no longer a sergeant but a woman who had witnessed the extremes of human experience, carried those echoes within her. She had learned that the greatest battles were not always fought on the front lines, but within the human heart, against the tide of fear, hatred, and despair. Her encounter with Klaus, the young German soldier, was not an isolated incident. It was a testament to a universal truth. In the crucible of conflict, where the lines between friend and foe were starkly drawn, there existed a profound, often hidden wellspring of empathy. It was in the shared glance between adversaries, the offer of a meager ration, the quiet tending of a wounded enemy, that the true resilience of humanity was revealed. She often revisited the memory of those dried berries, the simple yet profound gift. They were more than just food. They were a symbol of shared vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement of their common humanity. This act and others like it did not win the war. They did not halt the march of armies or erase the immense suffering, but they did something equally vital. They preserved the human spirit. They demonstrated that even when surrounded by the most brutal inhumanity, the capacity for kindness, for compassion, for forgiveness could endure. This was the enduring legacy of those quiet moments, the true echoes of humanity. They served as a powerful reminder that beneath the layers of uniform, ideology, and animosity lay a shared human experience, a common thread of vulnerability and hope. The world was scarred but not broken. The process of healing, both individual and collective, was long and arduous. But in the quiet acts of reconciliation, in the rebuilding of shattered lives, the spirit that Anya had witnessed on the battlefield continued to manifest. It was in the shared stories of survival, in the willingness to extend a hand to former enemies, in the quiet determination to create a future where such conflicts would not be repeated. These gestures, small and often unnoticed, were the true victories, the enduring testament to the strength of the human heart. They were the proof that even after the deepest darkness, the light of compassion could still find a way to shine through, a beacon of enduring hope for generations to come. Kindness, Anya understood, did not end wars, but it most certainly survived them, a quiet, persistent force that held the promise of a better tomorrow. The war had a way of stripping away the superfluous, leaving behind the raw essence of human interaction. Beyond the immediate survival instincts, beyond the ingrained animosity, lay a subtler, more complex layer of wartime psychology, the phenomenon of enemy empathy, not as an act of altruism, but as a cognitive dissonance resolution. Consider for a moment the soldier who has been relentlessly indoctrinated to view the opposing force as inherently evil, subhuman. When that soldier is confronted with an act of kindness from an enemy, the cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort caused by holding two conflicting beliefs or values, can be immense. The brain, seeking to reconcile this contradiction, may unconsciously reframe the enemy, not as a monster, but as an individual capable of human connection. This isn't necessarily a conscious choice driven by moral superiority, but a psychological imperative to maintain a coherent worldview. Furthermore, the shared experience of the trenches, the universal dread of artillery barrages, and the omnipresent specter of death could foster a peculiar form of camaraderie, albeit a silent and often fraught one, even between opposing soldiers. Imagine two men huddled in adjacent foxholes, both enduring the same freezing rain, both listening to the same terrifying symphony of destruction. While their flags might differ, their immediate reality is undeniably the same. This shared existential threat could, in certain circumstances, create a fleeting, unspoken bond, a recognition of mutual suffering that momentarily eclipses the imposed enmity. It's a recognition of shared mortality, a primal understanding that, despite the uniforms, they are both merely men caught in circumstances beyond their immediate control. This perspective offers a crucial insight into why such acts of compassion might arise not solely from inherent goodness, but from the sheer, undeniable proximity of shared human experience. Building on this, the concept of moral disengagement in warfare is also critical. Soldiers are trained to compartmentalize, to detach emotionally from their actions to carry out their duties. However, when confronted with an act of unexpected kindness from the enemy, this carefully constructed detachment can falter. The dissonance between the expected brutality and the observed compassion can force a re-evaluation, a subtle shift in perspective. It's akin to a glitch in the system of dehumanization. For instance, a soldier might be ordered to fire on an enemy position, but if they witness that same enemy sharing their last piece of bread with a starving civilian moments before, the black and white morality of the battlefield becomes a complex spectrum of gray. This internal conflict can lead to a momentary paralysis, a suspension of aggression, and an opening for a more nuanced interaction. Conversely, the impact of such encounters on morale, both for the giver and the receiver, cannot be overstated. For the soldier who extends kindness, it is a reaffirmation of their own humanity, a defiance against the dehumanizing forces of war. It's a way of saying, I am still human, even here. For the soldier who receives it, particularly an enemy soldier, it can be a lifeline. It can shatter the narrative of absolute hatred and offer a glimpse of hope. A reason to believe that peace, however distant, might one day be possible. Think of the psychological toll of constant exposure to violence. A single act of unexpected grace can be a powerful antidote to despair, a small but significant boost to a soldier's will to survive and, perhaps, to strive for something better beyond the conflict. Another crucial layer is the role of individual agency within a rigidly structured military hierarchy. While soldiers are expected to follow orders, they are not automatons. The decision to offer comfort, to share resources, or to show mercy when not explicitly ordered to do so, represents a powerful assertion of individual will. It is a conscious choice to prioritize a higher moral code over the dictates of war. This is where the narrative gains its profound depth. It highlights that even within systems designed for maximum destruction, the capacity for individual moral choice remains. Now consider how this applies when you face situations where societal pressures or group dynamics seem to dictate a certain behavior. The courage to act according to your own conscience, even when it deviates from the norm, is a powerful echo of these wartime acts of defiance against a brutal status quo. These moments, though often unrecorded and unsung, form the bedrock of a resilient humanity, demonstrating that the instinct for connection and compassion can, and often does, prevail. The chilling efficiency of wartime propaganda played a significant role in shaping perceptions, often creating an almost impenetrable barrier of dehumanization. Through relentless messaging, The enemy was systematically portrayed as a monolithic entity, devoid of individual suffering, personal aspirations, or human frailty. This deliberate construction of an other served a vital purpose. It enabled soldiers to carry out acts of violence without succumbing to the psychological burden of guilt or empathy. However, the very persistence of these acts of unexpected kindness suggests that this carefully crafted narrative was not entirely impermeable. It implies that the inherent human capacity for recognizing shared vulnerability could, at times, pierce through the layers of indoctrination. Now consider how this applies when you face situations where established narratives, whether political, social, or personal, attempt to pigeonhole entire groups of people. The challenge lies in looking beyond the label to see the individual story. Building on this, the concept of moral licensing offers another intriguing perspective. Once a soldier had engaged in acts of brutality or witnessed them, a subconscious psychological mechanism might operate, allowing for a subsequent act of compassion as a form of moral compensation. It's as if the individual, having transgressed deeply, seeks to reestablish a sense of moral equilibrium by performing an act of goodness, even if it's towards an enemy. This doesn't negate the sincerity of the compassionate act, but adds a layer of psychological complexity to its motivation. For example, a soldier who participated in a particularly brutal skirmish might later feel compelled to offer aid to a captured enemy, not purely out of empathy, but as a way to alleviate the internal dissonance created by their prior actions. This internal balancing act is a testament to the mind's persistent, albeit sometimes convoluted, drive towards maintaining a sense of moral coherence. Furthermore, the role of unexpected moments of shared vulnerability can foster a unique form of enemy recognition. When soldiers on opposing sides find themselves in situations where the primary threat is not each other, but the environment itself, a sudden blizzard, a collapsing structure, or even a shared experience of extreme hunger, a temporary suspension of hostilities can occur. In these instances, the shared struggle for survival can create a powerful, albeit transient, bond. Imagine a scenario where soldiers from opposing factions are trapped together in a bombed-out building during an unexpected bombardment. The immediate, shared goal becomes seeking shelter and safety, momentarily overriding their programmed animosity. This shared ordeal can humanize the enemy in a way that direct combat often cannot, highlighting their common struggle against forces far greater than their national allegiances. Conversely, the impact of these compassionate acts extended beyond the immediate battlefield, often resonating through personal correspondence. Letters from soldiers frequently detailed these extraordinary encounters, serving not only as a personal catharsis but also as a subtle testament to the enduring human spirit. These letters, often read by families and friends back home, could subtly challenge the simplistic narratives of total war, introducing nuances and exceptions that complicated the perception of the enemy. Consequently, these personal accounts, even if not widely disseminated, contributed to a broader, albeit often unspoken, understanding that the reality of war was far more complex than the official pronouncements suggested. Now, consider how personal testimonies, even those that seem to contradict prevailing opinions, can gradually shift perspectives within communities and families. Another crucial layer to consider is the influence of individual leadership and the ripple effect it can have. A commander who, by word or deed, demonstrates a degree of magnanimity or respect towards prisoners, or even fallen enemies, can subtly influence the behavior of their troops. This doesn't necessarily mean encouraging fraternization, but rather setting a tone that acknowledges the humanity of the adversary. For instance, a regimental officer who insists on proper treatment of prisoners, even under difficult circumstances, can foster an environment where acts of compassion are not seen as weakness, but as a reflection of discipline and moral integrity. This can create a more fertile ground for genuine empathy to emerge, even amidst the brutality of conflict. The psychological phenomenon known as moral licensing offers a particularly nuanced lens through which to examine these complex wartime interactions. It posits that, after performing an act that affirms one's moral self-image, individuals may feel permission to subsequently engage in behavior that is less morally commendable. In the context of war, this might manifest as a soldier, having just demonstrated an act of profound empathy towards a wounded enemy, perhaps sharing vital medical supplies or offering a moment of quiet reassurance, later feeling a subconscious license to engage in more aggressive or less compassionate actions during subsequent engagements. This isn't to diminish the sincerity of the initial compassionate act, but rather to understand the intricate psychological calculus at play. The mind, seeking to maintain a sense of internal consistency, might balance a good deed against a subsequent morally ambiguous one, thereby mitigating the psychological dissonance. Now consider how this applies when you face situations where a single positive action might paradoxically make it easier to overlook or rationalize subsequent less ethical behaviors in your own life or in observing others. Furthermore, the concept of enemy recognition extends beyond mere shared vulnerability to encompass the acknowledgement of shared social structures and familial bonds, even when perceived through an adversarial lens. Soldiers were often aware, through intercepted communications or captured documents, that their opponents were not merely individuals, but members of organized societies with families, loved ones, and personal histories. This awareness, even when framed within the context of war, could plant seeds of doubt about the absolute otherness of the enemy. The existence of letters, photographs, or personal effects belonging to enemy soldiers provided tangible evidence of their lives beyond the battlefield. This recognition of shared social realities, of the universal human experience of belonging to a family or community, could subtly undermine the effectiveness of dehumanizing propaganda, creating an opening for empathy to surface. Consider in your own experiences how acknowledging the broader social context and personal lives of those you might disagree with can fundamentally alter your perception of them. Conversely, the impact of these brief, often wordless encounters could reverberate through a soldier's entire wartime experience, influencing their morale and psychological resilience. For the soldier who offered kindness, it was a powerful affirmation of their own humanity, a personal rebellion against the dehumanizing nature of conflict. It was a way of preserving their core identity in a world designed to strip it away. For the recipient, particularly an enemy soldier, such an act could be a lifeline, a potent symbol that offered a glimmer of hope amidst the despair. It challenged the pervasive narrative of absolute hatred and suggested the possibility of a future beyond the conflict. This psychological uplift, though seemingly small, could be crucial in maintaining a soldier's will to endure, to survive, and perhaps to even envision a post-war world. Reflect for a moment on how a single act of unexpected kindness in a difficult situation can profoundly alter your outlook and your capacity to persevere. Another crucial layer to consider is the emergent role of individual agency within the rigid confines of military command structures. While soldiers were trained to follow orders, they were not mere automatons. The decision to extend compassion, to offer aid, or to show mercy when not explicitly commanded to do so represented a profound assertion of individual moral choice. It was a conscious act of prioritizing a higher ethical imperative over the sometimes brutal dictates of war. This inherent human capacity for moral decision-making, even under extreme duress, is what these narratives so powerfully illuminate. It demonstrates that within systems designed for destruction, the space for individual conscience and ethical action can persist and even flourish. Now think about how you navigate situations where you must make choices that might deviate from expectations or established norms, and the internal strength required to act according to your own moral compass. The influence of individual leadership, even in subtle ways, cannot be overstated in fostering an environment where compassion might emerge. A commanding officer who, through their actions or directives, subtly encourages a degree of respect for the enemy, even in defeat or captivity, can significantly shape the behavior of their troops. This might not involve direct fraternization, but rather a consistent emphasis on treating prisoners with a basic level of dignity or ensuring that fallen enemies are afforded a respectful burial. Such leadership can create a climate where acts of empathy are not viewed as a sign of weakness or disloyalty, but as a reflection of disciplined character and moral integrity. This, in turn, cultivates a more fertile ground for genuine human connection to surface, even amidst the pervasive brutality of warfare. Consider, in your own leadership roles or interactions, how your subtle cues and consistent behaviors can influence the ethical climate of a group. The psychological phenomenon of moral licensing, while present, often operates in conjunction with a deeper, more primal drive, the fundamental human need for narrative coherence. War, with its stark binaries of good versus evil, hero versus villain, presents a compelling, albeit often distorted, narrative framework. When an enemy soldier acts with unexpected compassion, it doesn't just create cognitive dissonance, it threatens the very story the soldier has been living. The narrative of "they are monsters" is challenged by the reality of a human being offering aid. Consequently, the soldier's internal narrative must adapt. They might subconsciously reframe the enemy not as inherently evil, but as an individual caught in a regrettable situation, thereby preserving a sense of moral order without entirely dismantling their worldview. This internal storytelling is crucial for maintaining psychological stability amidst the chaos. Now consider how this applies when you encounter information that contradicts a deeply held personal belief. How does your mind work to reconcile the new information with your existing narrative? Building upon this, the concept of situational empathy offers a fascinating counterpoint to inherent disposition. Rather than solely attributing compassionate acts to an individual's innate kindness, situational empathy suggests that specific environmental factors and immediate circumstances can trigger empathetic responses, even in individuals not typically inclined toward such behavior. The shared visceral experience of suffering, witnessing extreme pain, enduring shared deprivation, or facing a common existential threat can override ingrained animosity. Imagine a scenario where soldiers from opposing sides are forced to cooperate to survive a sudden, catastrophic natural event, like a flash flood or an avalanche. In such extreme circumstances, the immediate survival imperative and the shared vulnerability can foster a powerful, albeit temporary, surge of empathy, transcending national or ideological divides. Reflect on how specific, intense situations in your own life have elicited responses or emotions you might not have anticipated. Conversely, the long-term impact of these compassionate encounters often manifested in subtle but profound ways in the post-war period, influencing reconciliation efforts. Soldiers who had experienced or witnessed acts of kindness from the enemy were often more receptive to peace initiatives and less prone to perpetuating cycles of hatred. Their personal testimonies, when shared, could serve as powerful counter-narratives to lingering animosity, humanizing the former adversary and fostering a climate of understanding. For instance, veterans who had received aid from enemy medics or who had witnessed enemy soldiers risk their lives to save civilians were often instrumental in bridging divides and promoting reconciliation within their own communities. Consider how personal experiences, even those seemingly minor, can shape your broader views on conflict resolution and intergroup relations. Another crucial layer involves the psychological concept of perspective-taking as a catalyst for empathy. When a soldier actively attempts to imagine themselves in the enemy's position, considering their motivations, their fears, their own potential suffering, it can activate empathetic pathways in the brain. This is not necessarily a conscious act of sympathy, but a cognitive exercise that bridges the perceived gap between us and them. The act of sharing a photograph of family, as Klaus did, is a powerful facilitator of perspective-taking. It provides a tangible glimpse into the enemy's personal world, making it harder to sustain a purely adversarial view. Now, think about how consciously trying to understand another person's viewpoint, even when you strongly disagree with them, can alter your emotional response towards them. The strategic implications of these compassionate acts, though often unacknowledged by military command, were not entirely without effect. While not a deliberate tactic, moments of shared humanity could, in rare instances, de-escalate localized conflicts or create brief windows for communication. A soldier who had just received aid from an enemy combatant might be less inclined to engage in indiscriminate firing in a subsequent encounter, or might be more open to a parley. These spontaneous acts of grace, while not altering the overall course of the war, could, at the micro level of individual interactions, introduce elements of unpredictability and even humanity into the otherwise brutal calculus of conflict. It underscores the idea that even within rigid military structures, human agency could introduce unexpected variables. Consider how a single, unexpected act of kindness or restraint in a tense negotiation can sometimes shift the entire dynamic of the interaction. The phenomenon of moral drift, offers a compelling explanation for how individuals can gradually adapt to the harsh realities of war, often without a conscious decision to abandon their moral compass. This is not about a sudden shift, but a slow, incremental desensitization that occurs through repeated exposure to violence and suffering. Initially, acts of aggression might be deeply unsettling, triggering significant internal conflict. However, with each subsequent engagement, each witnessed casualty, the emotional impact lessens. This gradual erosion of emotional response allows soldiers to function more effectively in combat, but it also creates a dangerous landscape where previously abhorrent actions can become normalized. Consequently, an act of kindness towards an enemy, when it does occur, stands out not just as an anomaly, but as a deliberate, conscious exertion of will against this pervasive drift. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations where a gradual change in your environment or routine might subtly alter your perceptions or behaviors over time, sometimes without you fully realizing it. Building on this, the concept of in-group favoritism provides a powerful framework for understanding the inherent bias that war amplifies. Humans are naturally inclined to favor those within their own social group, a tendency that is amplified exponentially in a wartime context. This bias is reinforced through shared experiences, common goals, and the constant reinforcement of an us versus them mentality. Consequently, acts of compassion directed towards members of the in-group, sharing scarce resources, offering comfort to a wounded comrade, are often seen as natural and expected. The truly remarkable acts, the ones that resonate through history, are those that transcend this ingrained bias, where an individual extends genuine care and empathy to someone explicitly defined as an outsider, an enemy. This deliberate act of breaking down the in-group barrier is what makes these moments so profoundly significant. Think about how this tendency to favor your own group plays out in everyday situations, from workplace dynamics to social circles, and how challenging it can be to extend genuine consideration to those outside your immediate circle. Conversely, the bystander effect operates as a significant counterpoint to individual acts of compassion. In situations where suffering is evident, the presence of multiple individuals can paradoxically decrease the likelihood of any single person intervening. Diffusion of responsibility occurs where each person assumes that someone else will take action, or that the situation does not require personal intervention. In a wartime context, this effect can be amplified. Amidst the chaos and the sheer scale of suffering, an individual might feel overwhelmed, believing their single act of kindness to be insignificant or even futile. It takes a remarkable degree of personal conviction and courage to act decisively when surrounded by inaction, or when the prevailing atmosphere suggests that such gestures are inappropriate or even dangerous. Consider, for instance, how in a crowded public space a minor incident might go unaddressed because everyone assumes someone else will step in. This phenomenon highlights the bravery required for individual action when collective inaction is the norm. Another crucial layer is the role of unexpected moral exemplars within military units. These are individuals who, through their consistent actions and unwavering commitment to ethical conduct, serve as beacons of inspiration for their peers. Their behavior, even in the most challenging circumstances, demonstrates that it is possible to maintain one's humanity amidst brutality. The presence of such individuals can create a subtle but significant shift in the unit's moral climate, making it more likely for others to act compassionately. Their actions serve as a powerful counter-narrative to the dehumanizing pressures of war, providing a tangible example of the values that can endure even in the face of extreme adversity. Think about individuals in your own life or in public history who embody strong moral principles. How do their actions inspire or influence those around them, even in subtle ways? The concept of moral injury provides a profound insight into the long-term psychological consequences of warfare, particularly for those who witness or participate in extreme violence. Unlike PTSD, which focuses on the trauma of fear and threat, moral injury relates to the deep psychological wounds inflicted by actions that violate one's moral or ethical code. This can include perpetrating, failing to prevent, or witnessing acts that transgress deeply held beliefs about right and wrong. Consequently, an act of compassion towards an enemy can, for some, be a form of self-healing, a way to counteract the corrosive effects of moral injury. It's an attempt to reclaim a sense of moral integrity after experiencing or perpetrating acts that have deeply wounded the self. Now, consider how grappling with past actions that you perceive as ethically compromised can lead you to actively seek out opportunities to make amends or to engage in behaviors that affirm your core values. The profound psychological impact of moral injury offers a critical lens through which to understand the enduring effects of wartime actions, extending beyond the immediate trauma of combat. Unlike PTSD, which often centers on the fear and threat experienced, moral injury delves into the deep-seated psychological wounds inflicted by actions that fundamentally violate an individual's deeply held moral or ethical code. This can encompass perpetrating acts that transgress one's beliefs about right and wrong, failing to prevent such acts when witnessing them, or even experiencing betrayal by trusted leaders or comrades whose actions deviate from expected moral standards. Consequently, an act of compassion towards an enemy, in this context, can be viewed not merely as an isolated incident of kindness, but as a potent form of self-healing, a deliberate effort to counteract the corrosive effects of moral injury. It represents an attempt to reclaim a sense of moral integrity after experiencing or participating in actions that have deeply wounded the self, challenging the internal narrative of guilt or complicity. Now, consider how grappling with past actions that you perceive as ethically compromised might lead you to actively seek out opportunities to make amends or to engage in behaviors that affirm your core values, even in seemingly unrelated circumstances. Furthermore, the concept of in-group favoritism provides a powerful framework for understanding the inherent biases that war exponentially amplifies. Humans naturally tend to favor those within their own social group, a tendency that is significantly magnified in a wartime setting. This bias is reinforced through shared experiences, common objectives, and the constant pervasive reinforcement of an us versus them mentality. Consequently, acts of compassion directed towards members of the in-group, such as sharing scarce resources, offering comfort to a wounded comrade, or defending a fellow soldier, are often perceived as natural, expected, and morally sound. The truly remarkable and historically significant acts, however, are those that transcend this deeply ingrained bias. These are the instances where an individual consciously extends genuine care, empathy, and assistance to someone explicitly defined as an outsider, an enemy. This deliberate act of breaking down the perceived barrier between in-group and out-group is precisely what imbues these moments with such profound significance. Think about how this tendency to favor your own group plays out in everyday situations, from workplace dynamics to social circles, and how challenging it can be to extend genuine consideration and empathy to those outside your immediate perceived circle. Conversely, the psychological phenomenon of the bystander effect operates as a significant counterpoint to individual acts of compassion in high-stress environments. In situations where suffering is evident, the presence of multiple individuals can paradoxically decrease the likelihood of any single person intervening. A diffusion of responsibility occurs, where each person assumes that someone else will take action or that the situation does not necessarily require their personal intervention. In a wartime context, this effect can be dramatically amplified. Amidst the chaos, the pervasive threat, and the sheer scale of suffering, an individual might feel overwhelmed, believing their single act of kindness to be insignificant, potentially futile, or even dangerous. It requires a remarkable degree of personal conviction, courage, and a strong internal moral compass to act decisively when surrounded by inaction or when the prevailing atmosphere suggests that such gestures are inappropriate, counterproductive, or even risky. Consider, for instance, how in a crowded public space, a minor incident might go unaddressed because everyone assumes someone else will step in, leading to a collective inaction. This phenomenon highlights the profound bravery required for individual action when collective inaction is the prevailing norm. Another crucial layer involves the emergent role of moral exemplars within military units. These are individuals who, through their consistent actions and unwavering commitment to ethical conduct, serve as powerful beacons of inspiration for their peers. Their behavior, even when faced with the most challenging circumstances and extreme pressures, demonstrates that it is possible to maintain one's humanity and adhere to deeply held moral principles amidst widespread brutality. The presence of such individuals can create a subtle but significant positive shift in the unit's moral climate, making it more likely for others to act compassionately. Their actions serve as a potent counter-narrative to the dehumanizing pressures of war, providing a tangible, lived example of the values that can endure even in the face of extreme adversity. Think about individuals in your own life or in public history who embody strong moral principles. How do their actions inspire or influence those around them, even in subtle, understated ways? The true practice, therefore, begins now, in the quiet contemplation of these enduring echoes. It is in recognizing that the same capacity for empathy that flickered in the heart of a soldier on a battlefield resides within us today. The challenge is not to erase the memory of conflict, but to learn from its most profound lessons. That understanding can emerge from discord, that connection can be forged in the face of division, and that the quiet acts of compassion are, in their own way, the most powerful victories. For kindness, though it may not end wars, has the remarkable capacity to survive them, to endure, and to illuminate the path toward a future where such echoes are not exceptions,